What's up, peers, and welcome to the World Crypto Network. Here again, back for the Bitcoin Reading Group, a collaborative learning community for Bitcoiners. And this is going to be a really good one. We will continue our discussion of For a New Liberty, again, as a loose starting point for our conversation, but we pretty soon will be rambling along some crazy rabbit hole that we find. Of course, I'm not alone here today. I am joined here with Nico from Consensus. What's up?
Hey Max, thanks for the invite. I'm super psyched to be joining the first Bitcoin reading group. I will confess I haven't read all of those books. I've read some, but yeah, I'll try to keep up with you guys. Happy to be here and share my ideas.
Yes, awesome. And again, it's not too much about reading the book. It's about talking about these concepts being discussed in the book. And of course, reading the book is a nice baseline to start at, but that's not all that we cover today. We're also joined again back to back by Tib. What's up? Oh, you're still
Hey
muted.
guys, sorry I had the mic muted. Very excited to be here. Thanks, Max, for setting it up.
Yes. And we are also here back. We're joined by Crypto Rafe. What's up?
Hi guys, thanks to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Very stoked about our conversation, and let's get right into it. For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard, the Libertarian Manifesto. Last time we read part 1, Property, Exchange, and the State. Today we continue with part 2, Libertarian Applications to Current Problems. Right? This is not a dismal science. We actually talk about solutions to existing problems today. And so maybe just to start off, a couple of the headlines that Murray talks about here, that he identifies as being the main problem that we have: ISIS, which is theft, urban fiscal crisis, Vietnam and other foreign interventions, crime in the streets, the military-industrial complex, traffic congestion, transportation, we have river pollution, water shortages, air pollution, power shortages and blackouts, telephone services, postal services, television, welfare systems, the urban housing problem, union strikes and restrictions, education, inflation and stagflation, Watergate. And there are many more problems like this in our world currently going on. And not claiming that we know how to fix all of them, but we do believe to have found here a causal relation for all these problems. And they all stem from the very same issue, and that is aggression. Taking what is not yours, living above your means by stealing from others in all shapes or forms. So this is the basic libertarian creed, right? Pip, what are your thoughts on the current problems?
Yeah, all these systems display the same horizontal sort of standards right now, and it's sort of, you have rules, you have authority, and then you have rulers that enforce that authority on a given set of participants. What's interesting is in all these different systems, as you've mentioned, from education to transportation and so on and so forth, there's definitely coercion that is happening, and that's preventing participants from finding that equilibrium that is mutually beneficial to everyone. So, I like this idea a lot of letting standards emerge organically from the activities of participants that are basically voluntarily acting on their own behalfs. I'd be really curious to understand and observe better how these new standards can emerge from away from the rule. So let's say you look at, it was a really cool example. I don't think they talk about it in the book, but it's the traffic light system. I think Saifuddin Hummus had posted that on Twitter, talking about the red and green light traffic light system as a system that is based on rules. And the ruler, of course, in that scenario are the lights. And the reality is, when the light is green as a pedestrian, I'm going to cross the street without even looking because I know that the rule says I can cross. But if a car comes in and hits me, well, there's an accident. There's a black swan event, right? And so if you revert that system and actually start putting standards and letting standards emerge, and you remove those lights, you realize that if you don't have a rule, standards will definitely emerge organically. As a pedestrian looking to cross the street, I'm going to look left and right and basically make sure there's no car coming by because I care for my life. Same thing for cars. People don't want to hurt other folks. And so I think that set of heuristic is really interesting to observe and different and in many different other verticals and activities and sectors. And so for me, the understanding what are the trigger points in time that will sort of let rules and rulers sort of let standards emerge organically is a fascinating phenomenon to observe. So I'd be curious, like, to hear from you guys. Like, is there, like, for instance, in transportation or education, like, how, what is the sort of best way, or what are triggers that you've observed that sort of led those rules basically fade away for new standards to emerge?
Just a crazy idea here. How about we make cars have to pay for for the putting stuff in, making transactions in Bitcoin blockchain? You have to pay certain amount of satoshis for going through intersections, and those who are paying the most, they get the green light first. Just a joke.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Do you actually need green and red lights, which are,
Well,
yeah, I mean,
let me
not really lights, but the some kind of like who goes first. But yeah, just a joke.
let me tell you something. I've been living in Asia for quite a while now, and there are places, believe it or not, that it doesn't matter if you have a light or what color the light is, and somehow it functions, and it is amazing. For example, like, I learned to drive a motorbike for the first time in Vietnam. It was quite a scary experience indeed, and I don't know how, but it works. It's like an organism. It's like you can see the spontaneous order emerge. And there's light, sure, but it's like nobody's going to follow those because it's impossible, because everything would grind to a halt if you mess with that. And I do think, like, since we're talking about traffic here, I do think there was a really interesting thing about the fungi and Bitcoin, like how the fungus is kind of like, that Bitcoin is kind of like fungus. And they actually tested this. They put the Tokyo metro map they put the station, the food for the fungus, they put it on the stations, and the fungus itself created a more efficient network by organic means than the actual Tokyo network. So I think that's a very, very powerful thing about nature and spontaneous order and the illusion of control and the knowledge that we can somehow centrally plan these things and for the benefit of all instead of the invisible hand.
Yeah, I do agree. It's just inefficient to have a centralized decision makers.
Yeah, and great points that you bring up, Nico, here, that this really is a organic process, and it's guided by the invisible hand, as Adam Smith would say. But I mean, I would just say it's guided by free people. And I mean, humans have ingenuity, and we're designed to solve problems and to help others. And I mean, if we are left to our own devices, we usually find a solution somehow. And Tip, you also earlier spoke a bit about the education system. And that is something that I found so absolutely abhorring, because outcome-based education, as it's studied or as it taught all over the world, basically, was invented here in the Prussian system in Germany, and then very much adapted and improved upon, so to say, by the Nazis and the Hitler regime. And basically, what I value is that truth is active, and we can have one person who knows the truth, and only he knows it, and then he will teach it others and tell them exactly what the truth actually is, right? And if these others then accumulate this knowledge, but they must repeat after him, right? The teacher is in front, he knows what is right, and the student is taught by the teacher, and then the student has to repeat what the teacher has said. And if he has repeated correctly, he gets a good grade, right? And he gets passed to the next exam. But if he gets something wrong in repeating what the teacher has said, then he will be punished in some way. And the crazy thing here is that it's no longer a system of truth discovery. It's about compliance and walking along the same line. But truth is never known by one individual only, and he can never convey whole truth and all to the truth in his words and actions. That is impossible. Humans are not designed or are not perfect like that. And then with like non-outcome based education, but rather with the trivium of teaching, right, to accumulate knowledge from a wide eclectic array of sources, to internally try to discover whether the information is truthful or not, the understanding, right, and then applying what you know to be truthful for you individually as a free sovereign human being. That is, in my sense, just from a axiomatic point of view, that no, one person does not know the entire picture. But we all have the logos, the capacity to discover truth. And yes, we might make mistakes, but then we learn out of these mistakes and discover that the mistakes actually has occurred, which again is a part of truth discovery. And I think that is the main fallacy that outcome-based education poses.
Yeah, I do agree. I mean, I think the main problem is that people want to be right more than they want to really know the truth.
Yeah, and I do think also that willingness to fail is a prerequisite for personal growth. And this is something that is not actively taught to us, to be right, to be wrong constructively. Rather, we are punished for being wrong. And not only that, but it's a very subjective matter. A lot of the times it's the teacher's own personal or opinion, or a way of looking at things, or a thing that has been given from above of the teacher themselves to teach, to put into the minds of the young. And this is kind of like the hierarchical movement of knowledge, which doesn't apply, at least not today. It doesn't apply. I'm not sure if it ever applied very well, but for sure it doesn't apply in the age of internet, where all the information is free in the world university that is internet. The information should flow in every way. And the same thing in a like company structure, this traditional spider organization. Normally you are handed out assignments and information, and very seldom the information actually moves from the lower ladders upwards. For maybe there's a big ego on the way that is simply not willing to take advice from somebody who is junior in their view. But this is something like I think, I don't remember which book, but I think it was Rothbard who was talking about when is a human being adult. Like, we have this rule of many countries, 18 years is a standard, or 21, whatever, when you're old enough to take responsibility of yourself. I would say I know some 50-year-old people who are still not ready to face the world, the true world, and take personal responsibility and make good life decisions. So what would be what Rothbard's definition of adulthood would be when a person is ready to emancipate themselves. Not necessarily that they have to, but they are prepared to take care of themselves, provide for themselves without stealing from others, through their own entrepreneurship and through their own work. That should be like the basis of personal growth. Like, you need to be able to try on your own. You need to be free to try on your own, and you need to be able to fail repeatedly until you find something that works, and then you just iterate on that.
Yeah, and on that note, feel responsible for your personal growth and education, right? Because when I did all my high school in France, and you don't feel like you're accountable or responsible for your personal growth, because you're just following a very linear, pre-designed rhythm of learning that is imposed in a very sort of passive way as well. there's a professor, you know, just reading the book, and you just got to learn the chapters, and then read, basically regurgitate the chapters in the form of exams. There's no critical thinking. And so I think if you let, exactly like you said, let individuals be free, well, when you're free, you have to take responsibility and accountability for your own learning, for your own acts, because otherwise nobody will, and you'll just stay stagnant. And so I think removing freedom from people prevents them from being responsible for their own entity. And I think education wise, personally, now that I'm out of university and high school and that whole linear system, I'm learning maybe, I don't know, 10x more, because I'm free to learn whatever I want to learn. And there's no curriculum, there's no, you know, midterm dates and so on and so forth. And so it's just curiosity, and curiosity is freedom. And so then it's like I'm accountable to my own self or others with whom I'm learning freely on the internet, on Twitter, on that Bitcoin reading group, to actually, you know, read the material, think critically, and then express opinions and get those opinions challenged. And this personally, I've been, you know, learning a lot on that accountability and responsibility side of things. And I'm realizing that it's because I'm free in that process, not sort of delegating all that accountability to a pre-built system.
Yeah, I do agree. And I mean, I've been learning some stuff that I should have been learning in schools before. I've been, you know, just redoing all of them, whatever really interests me. And I've just acquired so much more knowledge than at that time when I was forced to do it, when I didn't have any kind of real interest into it. It's so much more efficient. Like to do it on your own free will.
Exactly right. And Tip, also what you brought up here with responsibility, and that goes hand in hand with freedom, right? And again, freedom is not given to you; you have it. You must defend it. You must claim it. And the thing then again with responsibility is that we might try to push it away and say, I do not want to be responsible for my action, but it's impossible. Like, you cannot do that. When you act, you have consequences. Always, 100% of the time, all the time. And they will always affect you. And again, if you walk off a cliff, you're gonna fall down. And it doesn't matter if you want to push that away and say, no, but I don't want to fall down. I don't want to be responsible for that. It doesn't matter. It's not how the universe works. And understanding then that both on the micro level, where one individual starts hurting others, and when he starts lying to others and himself, that then sooner or later he will be in complete chaos. I mean, try it. Take anything you want and lie as much as you can for one day and see where it gets you. It's not going to be pretty. And then try the opposite, right? Tell the truth and speak freely and act in a morally righteous way by not stealing from others. And then you will see that you still also get the consequence and the responsibility then out of your peaceful actions. And again, the belief that we can push this responsibility away and let the state take care of it, right? The granny state, the nanny state. And it's impossible, but it's very enticing. It's the quick and easy path, but it's wrong. What are your thoughts on this, Nico?
Yeah, I mean, monthly salary is one of the most addictive drugs for sure. And like, I used to be a lot on the left. I must confess, because not that long ago, I had those thoughts as well. And it was mostly because I didn't know any better. And once I found Bitcoin and I started, because I was into the technology side, and then I realized there's this money side, which is much more important than in social standards, like in political standards, and the whole world is affected by money because everybody needs it. And I realized that Bitcoin revolutionizes money, and it brings the scarcity and property rights to the equation. and it started. The system we lived in started to feel very, very silly to me indeed, and it's like that's where the rabbit hole started, kind of like opening for me. And shortly after that, I did leave my so-called good job, which is of course something that people will gasp at, like, oh, how can he just get a good education and then just leave this so-called high pay job, when actually what happens is that most of it goes to taxes, and then you lose the most scarce resource you have, which is your time. So you're working all the time for somebody else, building something for somebody else, and then you're paying taxes, which is taught to us that is normal, that is what a stand-up person does, because otherwise somehow the society and people cannot function. And I think that was around the time that I started traveling more, so I actually went to places where there are different kinds of governments, different kinds of ways of doing things. Sure, a lot of corruption and bad stuff and good stuff also, but different. And that was, I think, key for me to understand how things are done wrongly, for example, in my country, and how it could be done better, and how we could learn from other cultures. And it is a cult. Like if you think about the world culture, they put a cult in front for a reason, because what is, like, why would we have to defend our so-called our own culture in nationalistic terms and try to defend the borders when we should be opening them and learning from others? And through free entrepreneurship, free trade, which already is pretty much happening due to the internet. Of course, we still have like some restrictions between countries and a lot of problems and wars. But I think the sound money, the Bitcoin here, is going to make a big difference, because that is actually the monetary system that is, I think, in the core of all these problems, is funding all these unnecessary conflicts, because it's very expensive to wage a war. But if you have a money printing machine, it becomes much more tolerable. So you can keep bombing places and then rebuilding them for profit, and then take that away from the regular worker in front of taxes, and then just convince them somehow that this is a good thing and this is necessary. We need government spending to actually keep the wheels rolling, when that is in fact not the case, because we can always provide better services through free market, because whenever there's a need, whenever there's demand, there shall rise supply. And I think I can guarantee that much. Well, since everybody's silent, I'm just going to go on a little bit more about, like in the past, I used to have these socialistic thoughts and being on the left, but I was at some point ready to change my mind, and that's I think that is the problem, because I used to, and a lot of my friends I've lost because of turning into a Bitcoiner and turning into a so-called, I don't know, anarchist. And apparently that is something bad to be. And then some of my old friends would say something like, well, you didn't used to think this way. And, just a couple of years ago, you thought very differently. And then, it's like, I start to think like, really, is this the way that we are encouraged to think, that do not change your mind? I change my mind every day about many things nowadays. And it's more, sure, it's chaotic and it creates a lot of uncertainties in my life, but to be free, it's so much better. It's so worth it. What do you think, Dave?
100%. I'm laughing because I've experienced the same stuff with friends, and it's just uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable, and people like comfort because it's like you said, it's predictable, and it's less risky. And so it's funny because when you sort of embrace the other side and take that red pill, it's like you can't really go back and sort of take things for granted and sort of accept things as they are. And one realization I've had is that I had a lot of beliefs in my life that were non-tested before Bitcoin. like from diet to politics to it's covering so many different sort of buckets in one's life. And so by basically being open to reflecting on what money means through Bitcoin, I think this is one of the most personal, most well established belief that we all have, humans, in our brains and in our guts, is that sort of money should be controlled and by the government and distributed this way and sort of managed this way. And so if you're going into that area and start being open to challenging it, well, then you realize that you can challenge so many other things. And that's why, for instance, at the beginning, when I saw all the Bitcoiners eating meat, I was like, what the fuck is going on here? What is this? Is that sort of a requirement to be to be a carnivore if you want to be into Bitcoin? And so I started like looking into it and questioning my own diet. And I've been through like the political spectrum. I've tried different diets because I'm someone who's curious, but I've tried like, vegetarianism, vegan, and then keto, and then meat-based stuff. And so I think the point that I'm trying to make here is that it was uncomfortable going through all these changes, because each time I felt I had to justify it to my social circles. Oh, why are you changing? I thought you were a vegan. Oh, I thought you were a vegetarian. Now you're eating meat. And it's same thing for political views, same thing for anything. And so basically change assumes that you're okay saying that your previous self was wrong in some way. And
Yes.
that's tough because it hurts the ego. And so yeah, I think being curious, being open to change and evolve is, I think, the key to a fulfilled life, without providing you guys with cheesy fortune cookie statements. It's sort of how I see it now. And so if I can learn every day and become that 1% better, that's great. But it's uncomfortable, and sometimes it's painful because you realize that shit, I was actually completely off 2 months ago. But you get better. So yeah, I guess that's part of the whole stoicism of life, just being okay in discomfort and enjoying that. It's part of the process of learning.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you have to be able to step out of your comfort zone and realize the actual truth, and not just what makes you feel good and what makes your life easier. And just realizing that it's two completely different things doing, and what is right and whatever you do, and they don't have to match every single time. Not like everything I do is correct, and I just have to admit it. And yeah, I think that's one of the big first steps. And people are kind of like lazy. For example, what I keep hearing from my friends sometimes, my old friends or co-workers or whatever, like, for example, from the national debt, even though it keeps rising all the time, these guys just keep saying that, it doesn't matter. We don't ever have to pay them back. And there's no problem. It's only good that there's a lot of money. And, all of this kind of stupid stuff, which I just know that they aren't willing to dig any deeper into that stuff. And that's pretty much why I just left them being. I mean, they have to have their own self-interest in the stuff.
Yeah, you're right. I 100% agree with that. It takes curiosity and a willingness to spend time and energy trying to understand this stuff around money and monetary inflation in particular, and centrally controlled money in general. But that, again, because this is sort of it's just easy to stay in the status quo of acceptance and just not question it and stay as is, versus actually having to read Rothbard and be challenged on Twitter and basically admit that you had wrong beliefs. It takes curiosity and resilience.
Yeah, about challenging and changing, like you said correctly, it is uncomfortable to everybody actually, but I think the trick is to enjoy the discomfort, because you know that by having this low time preference, and you suffer for a while and then you enjoy life more greatly. And these are the kind of things that I try to teach to my family also. I actually pissed off my mom quite badly one day, and then she was like, "Do you absolutely have to question everything?" And I was like, "Well, yeah."
Yes, same thing. Big arguments with the mom about stuff like this.
And again, it's not like, obviously none of us is right about everything. Like you said, we change because we find something is not necessarily wrong, but something can be improved, or something is wrong, like the diet, or we are a lot. I feel like depression is nowadays recurring problem, and it's getting worse and worse with the millennials. And I think it's a lot about the diet and the way we spend time, and the media and everything, and because you don't know any better of the system, so it kind of passivates you. I used to be in the slump also, playing video games and getting drunk on my free time, and it's a miserable way to live your life, to try to always fetch for the short-term pleasure. And it only gives you, like, it's just like peeing your pants in the freezing temperature. It just gives you so much pleasure, and then it makes it so much worse. So while you are going through these changes, it is uncomfortable, it's uncertain, but if you don't do anything, it will be even worse. So for me, it's been eye-opening, and I like my life now, because it's every day is different, and I can keep learning. I have found so many good friends through Bitcoin, like you guys, and the talks we have in the Telegram and on the YouTube. It's just mind-blowing. Like, every day is mind-blowing. So this is such a better way to live. And I'm not saying that it's easy way to live. It's definitely a difficult way to live. And you don't have so much free time as you might think, but actually your time is enjoyable, like, most of the time. So I think that's something. Like, for example, I was just thinking, like, when did I last have a summer holiday? I don't remember anymore, because it doesn't matter. And most of the time I have to actually go and check the calendar, because I don't know what day it is or what time it is a lot of times, unless I have a scheduled meeting or a call. So I think that's a wonderful way to look at it, because before it was like, yeah, it's weekend, it's finally Friday, I can get wasted and forget about my miserable life for a while. And then on the Monday it would be like, oh, it's Monday, damn it, like, I have to go back to work and I have a hangover, and that was the cycle of life. And I think that's the cycle of many persons' life today. And I think we can help everybody to do better.
Great points that you all bring up, and tip especially, right, that you have to die a little, and how much that is really depends on how much of a mistake that you've made. So for example, like a story where, for example, for Bitcoin full nodes, right, I told the peers on the World Crypto Network that if you do assume valid, that and then a block hash for your initial block download in the specification flags, that then it would just assume everything prior to that block is valid and do no checks whatsoever, right? And that was a mistake, right? That was wrong. That was not the truth. That is not how things are. And thus, I maybe created a lot of confusion. Hopefully, I didn't lose anyone some money, right? Because it's actually like really serious software, and we need to be careful with stuff like this. But then I learned something new, right? That, okay, this is actually wrong. It's just the signatures that are assumed valid, but the building up of the UTXO set to actually verify which coins are still not spent, right? That still can be spent in the future. That is what assume valid does. Right? So that was then what is right. That is how it actually is. And now speaking this out, right? I make the universe whole again, right? I say, okay, I fucked up. I made a mistake. I said something that was not the truth. I know this now. I've accumulated enough information to understand this. So now I have to go fix it by telling everyone, okay, this is actually what is going on. But of course, this means I have to die a little. And it kind of sucks because, of course, we don't want to tell falsehood, right? We actually want to give good advice that is true. And with me, like speaking to hundreds of people, that actually serious shit might have happened. Well, I hope nothing has happened, but we never know. But that is only such a tiny, tiny thing, right? But now assume that your entire belief system was built on opportunity, on equality of outcome, right? To just be everyone has to have the same amount of house, same amount of car, same clothes to wear. Because otherwise, well, some people are just better off than others, and that's unfair, right? And if that is your baseline, and then you live years and years and years, and you build yourself a very complex system in your head, where a story that you keep on telling yourself, and you keep on finding new things in that rabbit hole, right? And they might seem plausible, but you don't really understand that it is actually based on a lie, on a falsehood. And then if you understand that your base axiom has been flawed, that's not just a little death. That's an ego death that kills you completely, because your entire belief system starts to crumble, and nothing that you thought to be true is actually, in fact, the truth. And that's why it's so damn difficult to break out of the matrix, right? To understand, okay, wait, actually, like everything I believed is a lie, and all the actions that I did were wrong, and I've hurt people with it. And I have to live with the responsibility now, not just of the consequences of my action, but knowing that I fucked up. And that is very, very burdensome and not easy at all. And that's why it's, again, so important to always go back and check our fundamental axioms. Because if we don't do that, then we might build an entire system that is wrong. And then the collapse is going to be tragic.
Yeah, I agree. And just two short quotes that I don't remember who said those, but truth is like an arrow, and when it hits, it hurts. I just like that. I don't know. I just read it a few years ago. And another one is that the lie is still a lie, even if everyone believes it, and the truth is still a truth, even if no one believes it. And those are the some of the small quotes that I've been liking and using as my kind of like way of looking at things.
Yeah, and on that second one, I like that. I like this one a lot. The fact that something that everybody believes, if it's not the truth, it is still wrong. This one is tough because as social beings, humans, we sort of tend to like to belong into the collective belief system, and actually being a contrarian, again, is hard because you're swimming in the against the water current, and so you got to swim harder if you don't want to drown. And so that means having more facts, meaning having better established arguments to disprove that assumed truth that is held by the collective mass of people, right? And that is really, really tough. And when I talk about these abstract concepts, of course, I'm thinking about just fiat currencies in general, and the fact that it is something that is functioning and that is actually right for societies and economies, while it's not. And so breaking that truth, I think that's what Bitcoin is proposing, and that's what Bitcoiners are trying to do, but it's hard because it's against the mainstream belief system. And so then basically, like, if I can add on that, as it was a little blank, it's the power of memes and narratives, I think, are very, very strong in that sort of attempt to demystify a fake truth and actually bring the only real one, which is, in the case of money, let's say Bitcoin. you need to constantly fight against memes and narratives that can be dangerous. The fact that Bitcoiners, for instance, being free market proponents are seen as or depicted sometimes as sort of right-wing extremists. And so I think, and perhaps I'm going into random streams of consciousness here, so if that doesn't make sense, please stop me. But I'm just thinking that it really takes determined, resilient groups of people to disprove collective wrong beliefs, basically, because you're constantly going to be fought with using memes that are appeal to the general population, and again, because you want to sort of belong and not be in opposition with the mainstream just for the sake of being in opposition. It really takes a sound, pure, rational, logical construct to really break those narratives that maybe that are often wrong, and relying on, as you said, Max, axioms that are not true.
Yeah, I think that there's something called the wisdom of the masses, and I find that more often than not, it's nothing to do with wisdom. It's just a herd mentality that can be manipulated by whoever has the best and most motivating and most resonating speech with the current message that is being passed around. And this is what it has come to. The virtue signaling is, I feel like, has been getting much stronger. And simple things like people always argument against anarchism that things are not so simple as just simply don't steal, but you would have to have all these elaborate social constructs and constricts as well, and you should be very careful of what you say, and your words shouldn't offend certain people, and you shouldn't do cultural appropriation and whatever the hell is the flavor of the day. This kind of virtue signaling. So this is, in my opinion, replacing the true morals and true virtue, which is simple: do not steal. And killing somebody is also stealing their life, or taking somebody's property without their consent is always wrong. And this is a simple way to look at it. And if you look at the world through these glasses, it becomes much more simple. But of course, there's certain parties who are running the show for everybody, and I feel like there's this division between 80%ers and 20%ers. Those are just arbitrary numbers, but the vast majority, the so-called wisdom of the masses, is actually the lambs that are being herded by whoever has the most convincing narrative. And this is why we have problems with nationalism, like immigrants and stuff like that. Of course, those are so-called real problems inside this very narrow context. But if you open that context to a global context, that we all realized we already live in a global village, called the internet, or called the world, and we use the global language, English, and we use the global money, Bitcoin. At least we have the opportunity to do so very soon. So we should look past our ego and kill our ego, because the ego is the enemy. The ego is the one that is easily corrupted and easily enticed by these words and this sugar dripping out of the mouth of politicians and putting us to the virtue signaling. And it does make us feel, and I used to be one of those people on Facebook, trying to tell people how they should do things and put ideas into their heads, and that was virtue signaling of my part. I wanted to show everybody, look, like, I know how things should be, so you should also do this, and if you don't do this, you should be prepared to feel very bad about yourself. And this is, of course, another kind of violence. And that brings me to equality, which is another point that I feel like is a huge problem, and also scapegoat. you know, oh well, you don't respect women, or you don't respect people of color, or whatever is the flavor of the day, in terms of equality, when we should think in terms of excellence, how to reach the point of excellence, rather than try to be flat-headed and try to be the same, because we are not the same. We don't have the same attributes. We are very different in birth. And human life itself, it has nothing to do with this equality. A human life is infinitely valuable, and that is at least what I believe. But it doesn't mean that we are equal. Our value and our the value that we can bring to others comes from our differences, comes from specialization. So we can choose what we love and do those things, and find our tribe, find our team, and create more resilient, anti-fragile, and better systems. I felt like giving a break if you guys want to jump in, because I tend to go on a long rant.
What are your thoughts on this, Raphael?
No, I mean, I pretty much agree totally with everything Nico said. And I just, started thinking about, in a game theoretical way, that if there actually would be this kind of like, well, let's call it like a new world order or whatever, these kind of like the shepherds of these herds. I mean, they would actually, in game theoretical way, they would like to have as much as possible of like this socialistic kind of system where we save everybody and help everybody and make everyone equal. So, I mean, it would be just much more easier to control this kind of like stupid herd in that sense, by all like media and everything. So I don't know, we have a lot to fight against. This is just this current system is optimal for these people if they exist.
Well, I'm going to continue on that because you guys are falling silent. I wanted to add one more thing about the free market in relationships, which I don't believe we have talked about yet. And I think this is something, free market doesn't apply only on economic level. It applies on human level. And I think we don't have, in the status quo system that we don't have true free market in relationship. We are still herded into thinking about getting married before you're 30, getting kids, getting at least 2 cars, at least in the western parts of the world. And for example, in the eastern parts of the world, like in Asia, the people are herded a little bit differently, but the idea is basically the same, that you should do certain things in a relationship. You should expect certain things from other individuals to make yourself happy. And I think that is one fundamental reason why we have so many breakups and so many divorces, because people don't really get into the relationships from their own perspective, from a mutual exchange of free market. So then you should only be with somebody because you want to be with them and they want to be with you, not because you are too old, or you're old enough already, or you have a social pressure. And the social pressure is, I think, the one that speaks to our ego and puts us under the pressure and depression. And then we might make decisions that we regret later. And I just wish people would think more in personal terms, like what is good for me, because what is good for the individual must therefore be good for the community and the society, because all the communities and all the societies, all the organizations comprise from individuals. So how could it not be that the good of individual is not also the good of the masses? So I think this is the kind of thought that I would like people to have more, more selfish. I mean, it's not strictly speaking selfish, but it's more like acknowledging that this is where we come from. We are animals after all. So more resources for me means that I can transfer my genes forward more it's more certain that I can transfer my genes, and that is by evolutional biology what we are meant to do. Of course, through social evolution we can raise to some extent above that, but I feel like there's this kind of like illusion of control and knowledge that we know better than nature, that how things should be, and then certain parties can take advantage of this and use the herd mentality against the people and basically create this modern slavery that we live currently.
Yeah, very, very great points. And I mean, it's always tough to say like that the free market is part of, like, I don't know, relationships or something. But I mean, the free market are free individuals. And do we have free individuals in a loving relationship? Yeah, of course. That's that like, yes, if it's not consensual, if one party rapes the other party and forces themselves upon the other, then of course this is not going to be a prosperous and fruitful relationship on all regards, right? So in a sense, yes, does the non-aggression principle apply to your loving partner? For sure, absolutely. But it's not as, let's say, as easy as this is, right? Because it's not just your immediate gratification, right, of having a willing partner, but it's also the long-term aspect of building a family. And that is something that goes beyond the individual in the literal sense, right? Because of the offspring of the individual, that you then have children and children's children, where you can work today in order to support them in the future and to make sure that they have the right tools at their disposal to make their life delightful. And in that sense, it's also an entrepreneurial act because you are inherently dealing with uncertainty, and you try to align your actions with the resources at your disposal in order to build something in the future that you judge at the current point in time to be worth it. And a family is that as well. So I would say that parents especially are entrepreneurs. They are building something beautiful today, and they will draw from that and grow out of that in the distant future. What are your things, Tit?
Yeah, I agree with you. Parents are definitely entrepreneurs because it is a wild west parenthood. I'm not a parent, so this is a purely speculative opinion of mine. But yeah, ultimately, I agree. I agree with that, and I I yeah, I think letting free market ideas sort of take over in many areas of our lives is again uncomfortable but highly desirable because that's how we get better. And so oh, I had an idea, but I forgot that my thought. Just bear with me 1 second. Nope, it's gone. Sorry, guys. But yeah. Max, would you mind sort of rephrasing the last piece of your question? I'm sure I'll bounce on it, but this one I completely lost it for some reason.
Well, Raphael, you just wanted to jump in, so just you pick it up.
No, just go ahead, guys. I mean, I was just gonna say that happens. I mean, I know the feeling.
Sorry, guys, I broke the flow here.
Well, no, but I mean, like, in general, it's the aspect of building something for the future, and that is not just freedom, that is not just entrepreneurship, that is also capitalism, right? It's to build something today, to sacrifice today, to do not consume today, but to save and to invest, so that in the future, which is uncertain, and you might die tomorrow, right? But nevertheless, you sacrifice something today in the hope, in the let's say in the judgment, to that in the future then you will be more productive, that you will remove more uneasiness with the same amount of sacrifice, and I think that all comes together in many aspects of life, including parenthood.
Yeah, and I do agree that parents are like entrepreneurs and they are doing great stuff for the future. I mean, I hope they are. And that's one of the parts. I mean, for example, in education, at least where I live and where I've been, there's a lot of like, people are not actually worried what they are going to teach their kids and all of that. They just expect the school to do all the teaching stuff and the teaching part. So that's, in my way, it's just so wrong that they are not taking responsibility of creating as good human beings as possible, and they just probably like putting their kids into this mass manipulation, brainwash like place where they come out as a piece of the herd. And I just, I would like to see people investing much more of their time, for if they choose to have kids, I mean, like investing their time in it so the kids actually, benefit the humanity and the humankind itself, and not just being a burden. And that's one of the things that, I think that people should be, well, just taking much more responsibility, and, not just believing that the school will teach all of the necessary stuff to their kids. They will miss a lot. And I mean, it's your responsibility to go on and look at these things and do the best you can for your kids.
I feel like we should go back to the kind of like the topic we were talking about earlier. Like Max outlined a lot of things Rothbard was talking about in his book, and union strikes were one of those things. I personally like the topic of unions because I feel like that is one of the big problems of a job market, because it stands in the way of free market. What do you guys think about the labor unions specifically?
Well, again, might be worth to start with some basic fundamental definitions, right? And of course, free individuals getting together and collaborating peacefully, right, by speaking out and coordinating their actions is absolutely in accordance with the non-aggression principle. So in a starfish organization, so to speak, right, in a peaceful group of peers, then they can coordinate and say, okay, we want to do this with our time and labor. And as long as it is peaceful and as long as it's mutually beneficial and consensual, then yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. But Rothbard, as he defines the state unions or worker unions in this case, it's that they are not peaceful. They are not in accordance with the non-aggression principle because they force others to do some specific tasks at the threat of violence, especially state violence. So, for example, a union often require a minimum wage, right? And this minimum wage is not a mutual beneficial thing. They say the entrepreneur has to pay us $10 an hour, and if he does not, or let's say $1,000 an hour, right? Doesn't matter. But if the entrepreneur does not want to do this, well, then bad luck for him. Then we will put him in a cage and take away his business, right? That is the mindset of a union. And not only is that unfair and theft of the property of the entrepreneur, but especially, and I think that's the main reason that unions are in existence, is that it keeps others out of their market, right? If you are only worth, let's say, 500 euros an hour, 500,000 satoshis per hour, then all of a sudden, right, you are no longer allowed at the threat of violence to take part in this job. Because, well, I don't know, maybe you can only mop the floors and the entrepreneur only wants to pay you 500 bucks as satoshis per hour. But of course, if he cannot do that, if he is being threatened to not do that, then you will not get the job. And this means that you, as the low-level entrepreneur or worker here, are at an expense, and you get aggressed against. And there are many flaws with such union level thinkings, mainly because they rely on aggression to get their ways, and that is what is wrong. Not the collaboration of workers. That is peaceful. but using their collective power and state power to then be tyrannical to the entrepreneur and their coworkers. What are your thoughts on this tip?
Yeah, I'm from France, so again, unions are pretty popular over there, and they tend to slow things down. So I agree with that. The fact that the use of force and violence to engage in negotiations with entrepreneurs who are running and building the businesses and investing capital into productive activities for growth is not positive. Now the flip side is trying to sort of open conversations between entrepreneurs and workers who are allocating their very scarce, precious time to the activity that is led by this entrepreneur. I think is very valuable as well. Like, you need to find ways to make sure that there's a conversation happening when there's a disagreement, and the government adding too many strict rules that specifically provide, say, monopolistic power and influence of particular unions, and I'm thinking in France in particular, with CGT and all these groups of people that tend to be more negative than positive in general. But it gives a sense of fairness to the workers that are being represented by these leaders of the unions. So again, this is sort of the optics. The optics game is a tough game to play because, like, public relationship wise, it may seem great that unions exist to protect workers, but if you look at the second and third order effects of these highly violent means of negotiating, they actually are negative for the workers. And so again, I think really dissecting those complex scenarios into basic first principles to restore the truth and the relationship between the entrepreneurs and the workers, and get to a middle ground in negotiations, I think would be highly advisable. But you're playing with optics here and politics, so it's not an easy game to play, definitely.
And I think a lot of the union thinking is that people, it's a human right to have a job, and it's an entrepreneur's main job, or one of the main jobs, in addition, of course, of generating tax revenue for the nanny state, is to provide jobs for human beings, which is not the case, of course. Any entrepreneur is working to provide benefits for themselves and their tribes and whoever they want to give that benefit to. And an entrepreneur would every time hire a skilled or unskilled laborer if the laborer can bring more value in than he takes out from the company. So this is, I think, is key to understanding. And I don't think many people understand how businesses work. Like, it would be a very healthy thing indeed for anybody to try to run their own business and realize that if you're not making enough money, you cannot afford. For example, I tried to hire a person in my company in Finland, and I realized that it's so expensive, I simply cannot afford it. So from now on, I just do collaborative efforts with other single entrepreneurs, because that's the only way that it's still profitable. And this has nothing to do with the labor laws or the minimal wage or anything like that. But there's also a lot of other costs that are incorporated in that. And furthermore, what happens when you actively ban, unions actively ban people from getting work with a wage that they are willing to accept, that is acceptable to them. Let's say that somebody is willing to wash the pints in a bar for like $2.50 per an hour. It's fine for them for a while, because that's what they need. And now they cannot get the job because it's illegal to hire you for such a low wage. the entrepreneur has to pay you at least €7 per an hour, and for that they will just use a machine or something else. So you are actually depriving, especially, and you are hurting especially the low skill laborers who don't maybe have, they cannot bring to the table so much that the entrepreneur could afford to pay them what they would like to have. And this prevents a lot of low skill laborers actually from getting a job and then falling back on government subsidies, which furthermore puts pressure on taxation and hurts the entrepreneurs even more, who will in the end of the day pick up the tab, of course.
Yeah, exactly right. Good points that you bring up here. And again, it is both a form of cooperation, right? As you say, we want to work together with people that are of the same mindset and that want to work on the same problems and find compelling solutions to those. And that is a very cooperative task, because we cannot do that alone. And we need to have division of labor in order to specialize on the task which we are marginally best at. And that might be for one person to, I don't know, be a typewriter and just write awesome blogs, right? And do education that way. That is a good task. And if he is better at doing that than at, for example, I don't know, building the hardware of a typewriter, right? Then of course he could then cooperate with someone who is marginally better at providing the hardware. And then the writer can work together with the typewriter producer, and they can then together build something delightful. And that is first and foremost a form of cooperation. And then competition comes into the part that if the type, or if the artist, if the author does not want to, or if he only has one possible person to buy the typewriter with, and it's a really shitty piece of technology and it doesn't work, right? Then he is kind of forced to go to cooperate with that one individual. And maybe he doesn't want to do that, right? Maybe he would like to have other alternatives. And these other alternatives, to be not forced to cooperate with the same person all the time, that is competition. To be able to choose the best person to cooperate with, and I think that is very powerful here to understand here that difference. And I'm talking here also in some sense here with Space Jockey in the chat, who claims that cooperation is better than competition. But I would say they go hand in hand, that we don't have to differentiate them on which is actually better. And when just here sharing screen, also thank you very much to Hypatia for the $5 donation. And Kevin, libertarianism is the best way to guarantee that the human race gets replaced by something much more civilized and rational. Well, again, thanks for your donation and great insight. But Raphael, what are your thoughts on the nuances between cooperation and competition?
I was going to comment about the union thing. I have to say, honestly, that me, myself, I have only actually benefited for different unions. They raised my salary maybe 2 years ago. But this is the thing that I honestly can say that I haven't really thought about the topic a lot. I do agree that all kind of this scenarios where they are using like aggression and force to get what they want is totally wrong. But this is the thing that even though I do benefit about this situation, I shouldn't really be, supporting it or saying or voting for it or whatever, just because I'm benefited from it. I haven't really, thought about it or read about it and how does it work and all of that. And these are the kind of things, people benefit from these kind of situation, and that's why they want to shut their eyes and don't want to listen to, a kind of negative thing. And just like in all of stuff.
Right, that's a great point, and a lot of people are benefiting from this. This is why it keeps going on. And I would compare this to the broken window fallacy, because it is much easier to observe something that it is happening. Like you said, your salary was raised. People whose rights for a job were defended. So you
Oh,
see the
yeah.
value that was created, but you don't see the value that is not created. You don't see the people who are out of the job because of these restrictive laws. You don't see the missed added capacity that an entrepreneur could add to their company and grow it furthermore and offer even more jobs. You don't see that because he has no chance to grow there because of the expenses that you know, are costly for him to maintain these. And some of the workers are good, of course, and they deserve it, but some of them are not, and they are taking advantage of the system. And of course, why wouldn't they? Because the system is there to be abused. And I think this is not an efficient way to provide employment to people.
Yeah, my point is that you should be truthful to yourself. I mean, even though you would benefit from something, doesn't mean it's right or whatever. I mean, I do see it honestly that there is so much weird stuff. I mean, how certain people get so paid so little for some work, and you know, some people get paid so much. And even though I would be in the winning side or whatever, if I would be, that wouldn't make it right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this actually takes me back to a heated Twitter argument I had with a random internet face about Uber drivers and how they are being exploited. And while I agree that, you know, it is probably a sucky deal, that I didn't do my research enough to know for sure, but it seems like the problem is that the drivers don't really know how to accurately calculate their actual expenses, and thus they are effectively putting themselves in a bad situation with their employer. Regardless, they are doing so from their free will, albeit that they didn't do their research and they are maybe not educated enough to make the correct choice for themselves, but it's still their choice. So this is, I would say, this is not a union problem. This is not a collective problem. This is an individual problem. And we individuals, just same way as in politics, we have always held all the power because we have two legs that we can use to walk away to a better deal and have some self-respect and have some you know, some personal responsibility and act. And that will be a clear impulse for the employer. Or, well, maybe like my workers start to disappear and walk away, maybe I should pay them a better salary. That is a healthy organic impulse to make things better, not just to try to coerce the entrepreneur to hire certain individuals and not be able to renew the workforce, because companies too have to die so that better ideas can come up. And you should not throw money at a company just to keep it up, just to keep the government spending up and keep the people employed. You know, unemployment is a part of this process, and it gives you a healthy fear of, you know, because you need to pay your bills and feed your family, then you will want to find something. You will want to use your resources and creativity to actually create some value that somebody is willing to pay for. And I think the union takes something away from that.
Yes, exactly, and it's very much that we have to somehow make sure that we don't mess things up, right? Because things are scarce; they can only be allocated at one task at one time. And if we misallocate them, if we do stuff with resources that might not be optimal, where we can do better, then we are over time going to lose and lose and lose wealth, and we will return to a very fragile state. And that is, of course, not desirable, right? To get poorer, to have less to eat, to move from a villa to a house, to a hut, to living under the bridge. No, that is not how things are nice and delightful, right? We want to build up capital. We want to be at a better position to solve problems that might occur to us in a uncertain future. And we do that with capital accumulation, right? And we do that with peaceful cooperation, and that is vitally important. So Tip, anything else that you wanted to pick up here that Rothbard covers in the first part here of the problems that we currently face?
think
you
we
might
might
be
have.
doing that. I have connections issues on my end. Cut off here.
Okay, then question back to you, Raphael. Anything that you also wanted to bring up here?
Nico had something to say.
I always have something to say, but I don't want to talk all the time. In case you guys want to chime in, but yeah, let's pick another topic. There was talk about fiscal crisis, foreign interventions, military, transportation. Let's go to transportation. Why don't we? Because I think before we went live, we had a pretty interesting conversation with Tib about transportation and the traffic lights. I think that was a nice analogy. Would you want to do that again, Tib, if you're there?
Yes. Sorry, guys. Bad network.
No worries, no worries. You were talking about traffic lights earlier before we went live. I think that was pretty good. Maybe we go there again.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, yeah. So I mean, yeah,
Yeah,
this
fee market, fee market into the intersection.
free market and traffic.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because these traffic lights, they seem to make a lot of sense, while actually there's a valid thesis to make in their sort of effect on congestion in cities. And I think you can oppose traffic lights to roundabouts, which are very popular in Europe, less so in North America, which create much more fluid circulation. And so I like to compare those two between standards and rules. The rules are imposed by traffic lights, meaning that when the light is red, cars stop and pedestrians can cross. And roundabouts are just standard. When you go in front of a roundabout, you can use that circular, shape to sort of go around and round and round until you actually pick a destination, and you can do that forever if you please. And so the traffic light system today that we have also make pedestrians and participants in that system a bit lazy, meaning that if I'm a car and I see a green light, I'm just gonna go ahead and press on the gas basically, without really looking around in a conscious effort to make sure that there's no one crossing the streets, for instance. And that's a mistake, because if there is a kid crossing the street and the kid just didn't look at the red light on his end, there may be an accident that actually is often the case, and unfortunately sometimes need to fatal situations. And so these rules-based systems tend to make us lazy in the comfort that they bring, because the participants in those systems that are rule-based tend to delegate their responsibility to the rules and the rulers in that system being the traffic lights. And so if there was no traffic lights and you're actually using another system like a roundabout, well, you know that you have to be very careful in terms of how you engage in that system. And so in roundabouts, for instance, there's no red light, as you guys all know. It's just, you just look around, and if there's no car, you can actually insert and then pick your destination. And so this is a much more fluid experience that actually puts the individual at the center, and specifically their responsibility is not being delegated, but proudly owned by the individual participants of that system. So I truly believe that they make a lot of sense. They're a bit harder because, of course, all individuals need to be held accountable for their actions and for their proper engagement in those systems and their proper understanding of the standards that govern those systems, not delegating into the rules. And so I find that truly fascinating in how our cities today are built, and how basically the entire traffic is being managed in most urban settings. And of course, congestion is also that's another topic, but you realize that by breaking circulation of cars in an artificial way that isn't dynamic, because regardless of the amount of cars in the street, most, and I'm saying most because now you have new traffic lights that tend to be dynamically adjusted, but most traffic lights are not and don't take into account the throughput of the system at any given time. And so that definitely is an issue.
Yeah, that's like good example is Finland, where I come from. There's actually traffic lights everywhere, even in the smaller roads, and even in the middle of the night, they might just stop you, even there's nobody there, just because the algorithm just says that now it's time to stop, and then people just wait. And this is the kind of a weird thing to me, because you get the fear of like getting punished if you break the rules, when actually the rules are stupid and they don't make things better. And I realized this when I started traveling, and I went around in Asia and rode around on motorbikes. And I realized that there's many places in the world that they have lights, but they're not respected at all. And somehow still people don't die all the time. Of course, there's many more accidents, but then again, there's much more people also. So that would be probably the reason why. But the point is that organically a spontaneous order emerges, and somehow everything just works. Like if you go to India, for example, you go to, let's say, Vietnam, you will see like these countless of tuk-tuks and motorbikes just going whichever way. And if you try to cross that, it will seem intimidating. But if you just go and you just walk a straight line and you don't do anything stupid and sudden moves, the traffic will just go around you, and you don't need a traffic light to tell the people that watch out, there's a human being, because they don't want to hit you. Why would they want to hit you? That would be horrible. And I think this is a good analogy for spontaneous order and what anarchy would mean in governance also. Why would people, like, this is a lot of times I hear when I talk about anarchy and talk about alternative systems of organizing society, is that, well, if there's no rules, if there's no one to enforce the rules, then everybody starts to go out and get a gun and kill people. That's not what's going to happen. Like, most people just want to go about their day and live happily and care for their family and care for their friends and do things that make them laugh and have a good life. Sure, there are psychopaths, but are the rules ever stopped a psychopath from doing whatever they want to do? No. So I would say that we should go more the organic way and self-regulatory way, rather than just try to enforce and centrally plan these rules.
Yeah, I do have to agree. I mean, when I was driving in Brazil, I do know that there's a lot of traffic, but for some reason, at least when I was driving in there, it just somehow worked out. I mean, it looks like a chaos, but everybody just wants to go. And there they also have some kind of like traffic rules, but nobody gives a damn about them. So there's these kind of like unwritten rules that they've come up to, which goes like the one with the more expensive car will have to like dodge everyone else. So I mean, it just works. At least at night, everyone with the cheap cars, they just go into the intersection without really braking or doing a damn thing. But those who are like actually care about their lives and care about their cars and are willing to just look out a little bit, they go after later. But yeah, it just organically works somehow.
And I think what is also though interesting to highlight is that the individual automobile is a very liberating technology, right? It now allows the individual to have full freedom of travel, and that is extremely powerful to be able to go anywhere that you want to, pretty much without too many costs and without too much expansion of your own labor and time. It's really insane, like to have the ability to individually travel from A to B pretty much instantly, especially compared to let's say 300 years back. It's probably even 200 years back, where you had to ride everything on horseback, right? That is very much a tool that can be used in order to empower individuals to live a delightful place. And it's very funny, and I just thought about that for inner cities, we have a lot of infrastructure that is paid for by the state, right? And that is mainly public transportation of railroads and bus systems, right? So a bunch of people get together, and then we collectively somehow decide where to go. And although, of course, this might be efficient in a sense that if everyone needs to go to the right place or to the same place, then yes, it makes sense to collaborate here. But again, because of many incentives here with a legal tender, so to say, of only having one system here providing the transportation, it kind of feels that oftentimes there are a lot of inefficiencies with traveling in such a way where everyone needs to go at the same time to the same place. And it might just be another point, another subtle point here that somehow explores this area of collectivism and individualism, to have different individual people going their own way and living their own lives, and micromanaging a group of people to somehow coordinate them with a central controller to do so. And maybe tying that back to, was that off air or did we already go live? I'm not sure. Where one of you said that a mushroom was placed in a grid of a city with all the stations, and he naturally found a nice, like a really optimal way of somehow reaching all these places in a very complex system. And this is very much this individual organic growth that comes out of free and sovereign human beings. So very complex or very interesting questions. What are your thoughts on this, Tip?
It was actually it was actually Tokyo metro map, and they tested it with the fungi. And I think it was I don't remember his name exactly, but it was Brandon something. He has
Brandon
really good.
Quittem. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Great.
The
Great
Bitcoin
Twitter.
fungus guy.
Yes. Go and follow him. He has a lot of good
Yes,
analogies.
he's awesome.
Yeah, and apparently they tested this by putting food in the Tokyo metro stations, and the fungi did indeed a much better job than human beings. So really great analogy for organic spontaneous order. Really great analogy for Bitcoin.
Yeah, what's interesting, if I can add to the Tokyo example, it's fascinating because what it took months for a team of brilliant engineers to design the map of Tokyo, the Tokyo Metro, and millions of dollars of design and just iterating in the entire process to optimize the circulation underground the city. And you realize that through biology and just dropping a few, basically reducing the scale of the metro map and putting it into a closed environment where you have different nodes of sugar that access food for the fungus is just I think it was under 72 hours, the experiment built a just shorter, more efficient routing system across those nodes. So I think humans, we have a lot to learn from biology, biochemistry, and all that. And so, making another comparison that is perhaps pretty basic but still interesting. There's no traffic light in the human body. Blood flows constantly, and if there's a vein that gets clogged, well, it'll just move around and find its way somehow to the heart to get pumped again through the full system. So I think we have a lot to learn on transportation and just urban planning in general from biochemistry, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, great points. And then maybe bringing this back a bit to the futuristic tech talk. how like drones. I think drones are very, very compelling, and especially 3D printed drones that run on very cheap and basic electric motors that you can get for a couple bucks or a couple satoshis, right? And then you 3D print the exact material or body chassis that you have. And then the cool things that we can do with that. So what are your thoughts, Nico, on how can we apply like the air and the like higher spaces above us in a 3D map to coordinate our travel?
Oh, that's yeah, that's one of my favorite topics. You know, we had this idea of airdrop pizza, and I think somebody's already done that. Like, not in scale, of course, but you know, like we're going to have these electrical cars driving our self-driving cars, right? Now, and I think the next step is going to be self-driving drones and personal drones. I think there's already a drone that can lift up a human being, but I think the more obvious first step would be parcel and postal services and food delivery, obviously. And I think actually I've been noticing when you use, for example, Tor, and you get all these what is that called? CAPTCHAs. Yeah, I blanked out there for a moment. You get all these CAPTCHAs where you actually, it seems like they added chimneys now. So to me, it seems obvious that now they're training the AI to actually spot the chimneys, so you can actually fly the drones in a domestic environment. And I do think that is the next step for parcel delivery. You're going to be able to just order a stuff, anything, and then it will just arrive behind your window, and then you can just grab it, which of course has horrible implications also for your security and surveillance, which we already have, like facial recognition. I read this book, I don't remember which book what it was, but it was talking about these drones that are actually mosquito sized, that can, you know, fire these small needles that can actually destroy a human being if you hit those needles in the eye. So that made me get rid of my cell phone entirely. A little bit of tinfoil moment there, but yeah, it's definitely interesting to see where we can use this new technology, and I do think it has huge implications in personal transportation as well. I don't think the self-driving cars are so much. I think that's going to be neat, but at the time, I think the drones are much more compelling already, and of course we're going to have still like the automated water vehicles and land vehicles for heavy freight and you know, stuff that we don't need to deliver right away, but maybe these personal deliveries will be handled by drone network.
Tip, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, no, drone is definitely a massive surveillance issue and privacy issue. So yeah, I'm thinking the real big application for self-driving vehicles is also going to be in long distances. And again, like going back to the idea of prosperity, you know, letting, for instance, truck drivers that today are really pushed to the limit of what is humanly possible in terms of working hours, and sort of help transition these people to jobs that are more fulfilling will be very, very cool to see. So I'm excited about this in transportation in general. And then yeah, I agree that the self-driving cars in urban settings we're still far away from this. It's there's still a lot of complex technology and use cases to figure out. Because the real problem with AI, and you look at it as sort of self-driving cars through computer vision being one particular area of AI, it's like you can't have a 0.1% deficiency in your results, because that often on the road, when you're driving a 1.5 ton vehicle, can lead to fatal scenarios. So that should be an interesting area also to see, to basically observe and understand, to see when these deficiencies can be fully nullified. I personally would love to have a personal drone to carry me around the city. I think It is the dream of mankind to fly freely. Hopefully, we'll get it soon. And get those pizzas airdropped as well would be amazing.
2 weeks, of course.
No pineapple, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, you're one of those. I'm a pineapple guy.
No.
No, right. The thing with pizza is it has to be on a really, really hot wood oven, and it has to be cooked in 2 minutes max, and you have to eat it directly. Otherwise, it's not really good pizza. So
Agreed.
I'm really skeptical with having drone delivered pizza, because that I mean, unless we get a like really high degree furnace into the drone itself, which
What if
I'm
it's being
sure
cooked in the drone?
exactly, and
Flying ovens, man.
I'm sure a good
Now we're
entrepreneur can come up with like a way of having real wood fire in like a stone oven and be like that delivered. Yes, I'm all for it. So let's get this going.
Well, you know what? Like we were thinking about the airdrop pizza in addition to NX Solar, which would be a solar planned thing. So think about this: once the capacity of solar panels go up, and you can actually produce a lot of excess energy, and we were planning to use that for Bitcoin mining, which is the obvious energy storage way. But we could also use it to generate heat. So we could have these oven spots together with the charging spots, so you could provide charge for the drones and you could provide heat to heat up the food. So you could actually just put the ingredients in the drone and then let it go to this one of these oven spots and heat it up, and then deliver it oven fresh. That certainly seems doable.
I don't know if I'm just skeptical, but I just imagine if there would be like pizza delivery drones out there. I mean, people would be trying to shoot them down pretty quickly. I mean, free pizza for everyone. They're just flying around, and or they would need some kind of like self-defense system, or at least a lot of cameras, and yeah, there would be these security issues and all of that. But one thing that came to my mind also about this discussion is that it's weird how quickly all this technology seems to be evolving, and people are, you know, finding new ways of doing stuff, but we are still stuck in these old traditions and all these psychological stuff. They don't seem to evolve, at least not in the same pace. I mean, for example, like there has been so many things that we've been doing for, let's say, in the last 30 years in technical perspective. But for example, these like governance systems like politics or the monetary system, or this kind of thinking that there has to be some kind of like centralized controller or some centralized power to do all this stuff. I mean, like this politics system has been created when we used to write with like quill, or I mean feather or an ink. I mean, we should be going into a different kind of systems much more quickly. Like this technology is going so quickly.
Yeah, right. And you bring a good point of, can you shoot these drones if they fly above your property? And Jeremy asked that in the chat as well. Do you own the space above your property? And that is a very good question, right? And Mary Rothbard talks about this. Might be in For New Liberty. Might be absolutely he does in Man, Economy, and State. Well, he talks about everything there. but basically, yes. If you use that property, if you have homesteaded it, if you're actively intermingling your human ingenuity with this natural resource that is scarce, right? It can only be used by one individual at any one time. It's the exact same case as the scarcity of land itself. Either I build a house here, well, it's not on the two-dimensional plane, right? The house is in the air already. And that means that anything that is within the height here of this house, which I'm actively using, that is my property. And of course, you might also claim that you are using like the very near vicinity. So someone cannot just build like a wooden plank right above your house, because that is like, he would, no, that's just logical. No, you use more than just a like really close vicinity to your rooftop. And then the question is, how high is that? Right? And that is a case-by-case judgment that we have to make. And I would say that especially in an age of drones, if a drone can just fly above your house at like 100 meters and is spying on you by making pictures and everything, then yes, he is invading your private property. And of course, the same claim could be made for a satellite that is very much in space at a point where you at no time whatsoever have full or usage of that space. So we can have that abundant space and homestead it, right? But then the tricky thing is here, he can still spy on you. He can still make pictures of you, and he can still see your shadow and all this stuff. So again, very, very tricky questions here. But I would say that just looking at something is not wrong because you're not taking something away. And if you don't want to be spied upon, then I think it's much more effective, of course, also to defend yourself with that. And to, well, like put shades in front of your windows, right? So nobody can watch in. Like that's just a natural thing that humans do. Privacy is your right. Privacy is a good thing to defend. We do that with stuff like building a house, right? Or speaking in private conversations. And the same then applies also to your airspace. If you're actively using it, sure. But then you have to claim it and defend it.
And just one other thing that came to my mind is that just about the long distance traveling or just, moving cargo or something like that. I think it was in Elon Musk that said this kind of like that it's weird how we transport stuff right now, like for example with planes that they use so much force and energy to go vertically into a place A to B, but if you could just shoot stuff up horizontally and just while the earth rotates and well, at least you would use so much less energy to go just straight up, and then you would just have to calculate where do you want to drop. And these kind of version that they are doing right now, these vertically landing rockets and all of that, I think that those could be cool and maybe even efficient. And another thing about the solar panels is that if you could maybe build this pizza place on top of the clouds, you could use the solar power. The solar panels will get at least so much more sunlight in itself above clouds because there is no offline mode for them, and they would be getting so much more energy from the sun than from the surface of the earth. So if you could just go ahead and drop those pizzas like down, it would be just so much more easier than just moving stuff vertically with drones pretty much close to earth where everyone can shoot them up down.
We've brought renewables in the discussion multiple times, and on the optics discussion, there's been a few cases made for renewables not being that energy efficient. If you look at the second and third order effects of actually from sourcing the raw materials to produce solar panels or wind turbines, to actually assembling them, building them, maintaining them, and then disposing of them. And so it's funny again because it seems to be we're back at the idea of optics. Like renewables, they of course it sounds good. It has a good, very palpable, relatable narrative and a good marketing, but it doesn't seem to be that efficient. And actually, the best source of energy production in terms of cost benefit is actually nuclear. But nuclear has a very poor PR, right? People don't see it as something reliable and secure, because we've seen incidents, very few of them, but whenever they happen, they were horribly terrifying. And so, again, this is something I'm really curious about in terms of how we go about switching our energy sources in the future, and looking at European nations like France, for instance. They've been extremely invested in nuclear plants, and recently, over the last 10 years, they've invested a lot of capital into building renewable energy plants like solar farms and wind farms, and the overall national cost of energy just went up because of all the R&D expenses. But you look at the total throughput of carbon emissions and all the other negative substances emanating from the production cycle of energy, they didn't decrease. And so, again, on the idea of optics and narrative and memes, I think it's really fascinating to really think hard in terms of what it means to actually deploy renewables at a large scale, because they don't make sense quite often. Even for hydro, you look at hydro here. I live in Montreal and Quebec, and we have a lot of hydroelectricity power production plants. And a lot of these power plants are in energy surplus, meaning they create way too much energy and there's not enough demand locally. So you may be thinking, yeah, well, that's fine. We can store that energy or transport it elsewhere. But actually, you can't. It's very, very, like, we're just bad at storing energy or transporting it. There's just too much loss, or it's too expensive. And so
that's why you guys should mine.
Eggman. So yeah, so the Quebec government, they made a huge public announcement. They did a request for proposal for like miners and all that, and they got, I think it was almost 10x the amount of surplus that they had and that they received in demand, which is phenomenal when you think about it. But somehow they freaked out and they froze the project. So, but all that to say, yes, Bitcoin mining would be great in Quebec. But right now, these renewables are not fully exploited, and even the ones that are in surplus are actually not fully utilized, and therefore are actually more of a cost than a benefit for the environment. Sorry, that was a long energy renewables rant, but I felt it sort of fitted well here.
And a wild
Ben.
Ben appears. What is
Nice.
Hey guys,
that? How are you doing?
What's up, Ben?
not bad. What's going on?
Rambling about the nuances of liberty and how we can have flying 3D printed drones with hot wood ovens delivering pizza fresh from the stone. But just the usual bitcoinreadinggroup.com.
My drones will be protecting my my anarcho-capitalist house as well.
Yes, 3D printed drones with 3D printed guns, shooting down all the drones that try to spy on you. Perfect.
No, but guys, didn't you heard about the new scaling solution that we have? We just have to put some solar panels into a pigeon, and well, we should tie a noddle into the back of pigeons and put it in the mesh network with the Gotenna, and using the blockstream satellite. And yeah, there was a picture in Twitter about this thing.
Man, I want to see that pigeon. It looks awesome.
Yeah, Peer the Pigeon.
So, Ben, maybe to clue you in, we are talking about the current problems that Rothbard talks about in the second part of this great book for New Liberty. So what are some problems that you see overall that might be solved by a analysis out of the node aggression principle?
That's a big question there, Max.
Yeah, that's why it's interesting.
can you give me a little more context?
Well, we talked about a lot already. So basically, like, we talked about education, we talked about healthcare, we talked about infrastructure, the mindset of the individual. But maybe what we did not talk about that might be interesting, just to switch this conversation in general, would be to talk about how a aggressive monetary system specifically plays out, and where the main problems are in this.
Yeah, I think the monetary system we have right now is it is mired in illusion of how much is being stolen, right? So the non-aggression principle means don't steal from anybody, but so much of our wealth is being inflated away from us, and we can't even see. We measure it by this 2% number of inflation, but it's really all a lie. And I think we don't even realize what it is, and it's hard to know what we're really losing to. I think it was Zane who pointed out we should be expecting prices to be falling as we get better at making things and get better at distributing things. Everything should be cheaper. Every year, things should get cheaper, and they're actually going up. So when we call it 2% inflation, well, I think we have no idea what that number really means, right? And I think when we stop stealing from everybody, that's why you hear people when they talk about a sound money that there's really prosperity for the people on the horizon with something like that. But I don't know, maybe I'm just being super optimistic.
Yeah, and just the fact that people don't really seem to think about the stuff, or maybe they just don't care. But for example, for euro, we have been using it here in Finland for about 20 years now. And if they actually have 2% inflation rate per year, that means that they have created during these 20 years about more than 45% of new capital just in itself. So that's pretty much like stealing from the wealth you have if you are, like saving it in euros. But those are just things that people don't seem to think about.
Yeah, there's so much stealing going on, and it's all hidden. It's all obscured away from us. If we just all stop stealing from each other, and we could actually save and accumulate capital, then we could do stuff with the capital that we accumulate, and we wouldn't need so much credit all the time. And anything you need to buy in modern life needs to be large, large amounts of debt are required. And I think that's the product of this robbery system that is just so built into our society. It's so hard to see what it would be like without it.
Yeah, and it's weird seeing that people don't care about, or they aren't worried about governments getting more and more debt all the time, and they just thinking it in a way that they don't have to pay it ever, or it would just work out. I don't know, some kind of fantasies that it doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, I agree, but I kind of disagree. I think people have been talking about. My father is not into any of these teachings, but he told me in the 80s when I was very young. He said, the national debt that keeps going up more and more. Now I'm talking about the U.S., of course, but I'm sure it's similar other places. The national debt isn't stealing from him. He was pointing at me and saying, it's stealing from you. It's stealing from your future, right? So, I mean, he got it, and he didn't have to dig into all these Austrian economics textbooks to figure it out. So, I mean, the information is there, but like you said, why do people not care, right? The modern monetary theorists these days are saying, oh, well, you can't run out of dollars. It's fine. Don't worry about it. But why don't people care? That's a great question.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just a basic Keynesian thing, I guess it was that we don't have to worry about inflation or debt because we're going to be dead in 100 years anyway.
Well, in the long run, we are all dead. That was the famous statement by Keynes, and he meant it. He's like, we don't have to care about the long run, because then we'll be out of office, and we've already lived our lives, and well, it has been quite a lot of fun, hasn't it? A very satanistic here to just think of the here and now, and to have a very high time preference, and to want to consume. That's the entire Keynesian model: is to eat today, eat as much as you can, and eat your belly full thrice over. Don't think about tomorrow; it doesn't matter. You're hungry today. So eat as much as you can, and that is very. It's. I mean, we're talking about like pizzas now in the chat. It makes me hungry all this eating talk. But that it's a very different baseline again, right? It's instant gratification as the highest good to desire, and that then of course if you have that, then yeah, start stealing, start lying, because that will be good for the short term. And that will make your life, for the very brief second that you are drunk and high on all the drugs, then yeah, perfect, a lot of fun. Next day with the hangover, not so much anymore, right? So the decrease of time preference, the realization of the importance of thinking ahead in the future is very, very important. So yeah, the time preference is an integral part that a monetary asset changes, and the chaos and tragic that emerges out of a weak fiat currency that is based on aggression is very tragic on many different sources.
And Max,
yeah, and I think that just to say that I think that's a good angle to leverage on parents. I mean, they should care about what's going to happen to their children or grandchildren. They just maybe don't realize it.
Yep, agreed. I think I was just kind of try to kind of rephrase what Max was saying, as I think the product of the system that we have here corrupts our time preference. It shifts all of the incentive mechanisms, and it changes how we think about the future. It actually forces us to think about the present. You know, one of the things I talked about is pursuing streams of money, because the money evaporates. You have to have a stream of money coming in just to survive. So we've now corrupted ourselves. Instead of accumulating capital stock and saving for the future, that we have to pursue streams of money. I don't know. Is anybody following?
That is dope. That's very profound, man.
They've corrupted our minds and our thoughts and our actions, and I don't think we've realized that.
I wrote down the streams of money. I think that's really exactly what it is. Like, we keep talking about these sources of passive income, like we need to have multiple sources of income. And why is that? Because, well, the value gets stolen away from us, really. And we're not there yet where we can use global digital sound money, that is Bitcoin, for absolutely everything. I mean, yeah, sure, we can use it, but it's not a fully recognized currency. So we still have to depend to some extent to fiat money. And we do need those streams of income. And like you said, Max, what Keynes said, I was shocked to find that he actually said that in the long run we're all dead. I was like, that is very, very, sounds very evil to me. And I used to think that, you know, the politicians in Finland are just clueless, because there was this guy who actually, his party won the election that we just had. So, you know, no high hopes there. And he said in an interview, the interviewer asked about his perspective, where does he see? Because I think it was related to Finland turning 100 years of independence. So the question was like, where do you see Finland after 100 more years, you know, after 200 years? And he was like laughing, ha ha ha, you know, none of us is going to be even alive then. So, you know, that's a silly question. And I was like, well, all right, that's unsettling.
Meaning that they're just not even thinking about the future? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I mean, he's like, yeah, we're all gonna be dead then. Like, that's a silly question. And why are you asking me something like that? Why are you asking me about things in 100 years? You know, for him, it didn't even occur that he would, and he's a politician, a top line politician, who's actually making decisions for the whole nation. So that is very, very unsettling that he's not even considering the future generations.
I would agree.
Of course, he's yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was gonna kind of take that exactly what you're saying and take it a step further. Is that the system we have now, right? The optics of trying to raise taxes to pay for something, and the optics of, well, we can just run it, deficit spending. This is the paradigm that we live in, and politicians, they're elected for 2 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 years, depending on where you are, and they don't have to worry about really paying for anything. They're not forced to raise capital, and they can promise you anything, and they can deliver it even. They don't have to worry about the cost. And in fact, the cost is just a number on a balance sheet somewhere that they can just, with a keystroke, they can bring into existence. And the real cost is obviously much farther down the line, and that's all the costs that we were just talking about. But the short-termism I think Saifedean talks about, and Paranoid Bull talks about that on Twitter. The short-termism is the corruption that we're describing, right? And it's the short-termism in politics where you're saying this politician's not even worried about 100 years. I'm saying that they're not even worried about what happens after they're out of office. All they have to do is get into office, and they can get power and influence, and they can get legislation passed to help them, and then they can get out of office. And the platform that they got into office in the first place is just promising you free stuff. It's madness. It's madness.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think one of the main issues about this current political system is that they don't have any kind of responsibility of what they are doing, and if it's wrong. And same goes to the voters. I mean, it would be much more efficient, and people would be thinking about much more when they are going to vote, and when they are going to be, trying to get elected and all of that. There should be much more
exactly right.
Responsibility.
Yeah, that's completely right. They only care about preserving their benefits, and it's even more funny when they have quite a high salary as well, and in Italy they have even higher salaries, and the justification for that is that they won't be corrupt by bribes and stuff because they are well paid. And that is the opposite what is happening, because you're not having the people's and the society's best interest at hand. You have the interest of preserving your position and your position of money and power, and nothing else. And whatever gets you that, you will lie, you will you will betray your voters. It doesn't matter as long as you stay on top for the term and hopefully get reelected. Maybe you can think like a couple terms, but certainly you don't think 100 years. You don't think where our kids going to, what kind of a world are they going to live in, which I think everybody should think. And I'm appalled that this is not the case.
Yeah, right. And not just is it that they do not think ahead to the future, they just don't even care for the moment. They don't even, for them, it's like, yeah, I'm stealing today and I'm stealing in the future. It doesn't matter. I'm stealing all the time. and that is very fucked up, to be honest. To be like, yeah, I just steal as much as I can from today's generation via direct taxation, and via tomorrow's generation via inflation and via debt. I mean, like, seriously, come on. Let's maybe not steal and do it today and tomorrow.
What do you guys think about the falling into the trap of, now that we're in this system, how would you ever convince them to shut off these money faucets, right? Like, they all benefit from this. And as a politician that's trying to run, right? Like, oh, I'm just going to shut off all the money faucets, and you're going to actually have to pay a whole bunch of taxes in order to get what you want now. And you're going to see it, and it's going to be immediate. Like, I don't think that there's a way out of that system by like literally going back to a gold standard or whatever. I don't see them ever leaving that. I don't know.
I think from a micro market standpoint, there is, not from a political standpoint. And of course, politics are tied to markets. So, you look at the unfunded liabilities of in the US, specifically internally, like you have more than $200 trillion that are not payable to pension plans, right? People who are going to retirement, and once people realize that all the money they paid through income tax and other forms of taxes during their employed life are they're not getting it back in the form of retirement. I think there's a compelling argument here to be made to sort of actually get a wake up call and be like, maybe that's not the right system. Maybe that system doesn't work. But it's going to be painful if that realization comes through that mechanism.
Yeah, I have often said that I don't think that there's a so-called peaceful resolution for this kind of like change in monetary policy. I don't think like, the value of Bitcoin comes from the fact that the governments and the central banking system is screwing things over, and people are tired of that, and people want freedom. And I just don't see it happening in the scale fast enough that the governments would adopt better monetary policies, better governmental policies that would actually benefit people to the extent that they could save themselves from this. I think it's going to be a violent outburst of like hyperinflation / hyper Bitcoinization, which is going to be ugly, and it's going to leave a lot of uninformed people in the dust, unfortunately. And that's why what we talk about here is quite important. So we could wake up as many minds as possible and buy that Bitcoin, because it is a self-defense tool against the madness that is going around.
And that's a really
Very well
interesting
said.
thought. Yeah, I just want to bring out this idea that has been coming up many times in different discussions, that this possibility that the Fiat system, the shit hits the fan, and there will be actually this hyper Bitcoinization thing, and some people actually might suffer and all of that, but so is supporting Bitcoin in some way like supporting new wave of some type of Darwinism. And I mean, there will be a lot of people that would get wrecked, and I don't know. I mean, that's why I think it's just like a launching Bitcoin or whatever. You have to have fair launch. So if that's the case, I mean, we should actually be talking about this stuff and trying to educate as much people as possible to get as fair launch as possible.
Oh yeah, very well said, Rafael. And that is essentially important, right? Because we have to remember the Cantillon effect is it's here. It's a true economic phenomena, and this happens in all currencies, including in Bitcoin. So Satoshi had the great conundrum of how will he handle the Cantillon effect of releasing a new sound money into existence, so that it is fair for everyone, and that the quote unquote destructive nature of the Cantillon effect will not be as much. So Cantillon effect just means the money producers gain in wealth at the expense of the money holders, and those that later get their currency and get their cash flow in currency in that sound money, that is the newly issued one. And that is very, very difficult. And so he did that first and foremost, right, by having it stretched out, right, by not giving himself all the money from day one, because then he would be the sole beneficiary of the Cantillon effect at the expense of everyone else. Not fair, right? So he stretched that out across 140 years, right? So pretty long time horizon, and he nevertheless did it in a way that anyone, virtually every single one that can do mathematics, has the opportunity of being a money producer. And becoming a miner is permissionless, it's censorship resistant, it requires only very basic tools, electricity and computing power, which at today's age is like pretty decent to do. Yes, we're getting more and more specialized entrepreneurs, but I would wager that because we've seen actually a lot of the Cantillon effect in the early days of Bitcoin, right? Half of the Bitcoin were mined in the first 4 years. That's a lot of inflation or issuance rate. And that, in my opinion, leads to much more centralization of mining as otherwise would have been the case. So it's going to be really interesting to see now the tail end of Bitcoin mining. Now that we have 18 million of the 21 million now, we are going to have a very tiny issuance rate in the near future and in the very long future, especially. And I would wager then here that this will shift markets very, very thoroughly. And hopefully to a more decentralized mining ecosystem where, again, more people have the opportunity to participate in the Cantillon effect.
Yeah, that's a very good point. That's often what I use as a pro argument to people who think that Bitcoin is unfair because they missed the boat. And I'm going to come back to the boat analogy because that's a good one. But they feel like, because they didn't get in early enough, now they would just benefit the holders that got in early. And what I try to tell people is that it is still very early days. And this is a chance to actually be able to benefit from the Cantillon effects, which normally are out of our reach, because who benefits from those dollars that are being printed to somebody's pocket and their friend's pocket, and the funding goes wherever they want and they choose, and we pay the price via inflation, and that is much worse. And of course, Bitcoin does have inflation, but then again, there's something called stock to flow ratio, which I believe that next year Bitcoin is going to surpass the gold's stock to flow ratio. So as in monetary terms, it already becomes a better money than gold, which is saying a lot. If you look at the 4,000 years of monetary history of gold, or probably even more than that, I don't remember exactly. But Saifedian talked about this in his book Bitcoin Standard, which is a phenomenal book, and I recommend anybody to read it. But yeah, I think he also, I don't remember if it was Saifedian or somebody else who made the lifeboat metaphor, that Bitcoin is the lifeboat. It is something mundane, boring, that is not interesting to the masses until the very moment that you actual life depends on it and everybody wants to jump in it. So get interested in the lifeboat before you absolutely need it.
Yeah, great points. Ben, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think it's interesting that both gold and Bitcoin kind of mitigates the Cantillon effect, because new money is costly to produce. So gold, you have to go mine it out of the ground, and Bitcoin, you have to go mine it with math. So I think Satoshi was thinking about that when he made that, right? So yes, he was trying to mitigate that as much as possible. Yeah, I don't know. I think these guys said it really well.
Yeah, and again, well, but Nico, you said that there is inflation in Bitcoin, and I actually don't really think that that is necessarily the case. Because again, what is inflation? It's not an issuance rate of the money supply. That is an issuance rate. That is an increase of the supply. But that is not necessarily inflation as defined in the classical works. Rather, inflation, and Röke de Hulsmann's on the ethics of money production is very, very precise on this point. And we read that, of course, the last time, right? And he is talking that inflation is a issuance or a increase of the money supply, but under the existence of theft, of breaking of private property. And there are several different ways that you can do that. Either it is by lying, right? You have a gold coin, and it says there are 1 ounces of gold is in here, like pure gold. But then actually it's not 1 ounce, but half of an ounce. But still on the front, it says 1 ounce. And you force people to accept this one coin as being 1 ounce worth of silver, of gold. But actually it's only half an ounce. That is theft, right? That is inflation. Then also inflation would be legal tender laws in general. To say that you have to use this money. And if not, then I will put you in a cage, right? Or you will have to pay some extra damages. And this is, of course, here again, theft, right? And coercion. And then ultimately, debt-based fiat money, where you actually have to go into debt in order to use money, which is antithesis to what currency actually are supposed to do. And here there are different ways that you can steal from others, but important is for inflation that someone is being stolen from. And in Bitcoin, I would argue, especially because it is a consensus-based system, everyone who is running a full node thus has agreed to the rules of Bitcoin. And the rules, the consensus Nakamoto rules, they also include the issuance rate of Bitcoin. And thus there is no legal tender laws, right? And because anyone can enter the market for miners, there's also no monopoly. And thus, because anyone has the same opportunity of creating that money and being the first to receive it, here again, I don't think that it is a major pain point here. It's not inflation, it's an issuance rate. What do you think?
I wasn't aware of that definition of inflation. I need to read it is on my list to read the ethics of money creation. And I really like that because I don't like calling it inflation. I've always thought that inflation is simply just increasing the money supply, but I guess I was wrong on that point. So I like this definition, and I'm definitely going to look into that more.
Yeah, I agree with Max too, that issuance is a much better word. And, this is predetermined schedule that everybody knows far in advance, and everybody who can freely find this information for this freely open source software can know all this stuff in advance. And I think that's very profound. Imagine being able to know what the gold issuance rate was, 100 years out. That's super profound. There's also a really interesting thing by Eric Voskill, Evoskill on Twitter. He was talking about how stock to flow ratio doesn't actually dictate what it will be in the future. And I think he was being a little tongue-in-cheek there because he was saying, like the stock to flow of gold right now doesn't actually dictate what the stock to flow of gold will be in the future, because we could mine an asteroid or figure out a way to extract it from the oceans, or hit a gold vein somehow, and all of a sudden there would be a lot of new supply of gold. But obviously for those of us who've grokked the Bitcoin issuance schedule, it is really the only money that has ever existed that we can know these things in advance. And it is really the only money that we know that stock to flow ratio is this fixed issuance schedule. It is that, there's so many little profound things about Bitcoin, but that is just one of the many that this is the soundest, hardest, most fair money that has ever existed.
Yeah, that is precisely what.
Yeah, go ahead, Nico.
That is precisely what makes Bitcoin the better money than gold. The gold is not truly scarce. Of course, it's a little bit far-fetched to think that suddenly the supply would it would have to spike a lot. Like the price of gold would have to skyrocket, so that the miners would actually go out of their way to develop these methods of mining asteroids, or then the technology will come cheaper. Anyway, it might happen, but I do think that what is more likely is that during hyper Bitcoinization, gold is going to lose value heavily, because Bitcoin is going to take a lot of market from that, because it is a better, more and truly scarce money. I think somebody said that if we enter the time of Star Trek replicators, then Bitcoin and time are still the only two scarce things in existence. I really like that.
Yeah, and I pushed back on that one when he wrote that. I can't remember who that was. I think it was Gigi. And I wrote, well, that's ironic, because the Star Trek universe actually states that it's replicators themselves which brought them beyond money. They had true abundance, right? There was no scarce resources. Everybody could 3D print anything they wanted to anytime, so they didn't need money anymore. And I thought that was really funny. And then he posted something right afterward. Oh, I have to remember what it was. He said, oh, well, then what would happen to Bitcoin if energy was free? Like if we automatically just had magic free energy, like just coming out of the ground that we could just tap into, would it change anything? And I wrote a little thread on it, but I said in the long run, I don't think it actually changes anything. Yeah, I don't know. I like that thread a lot, though.
Yeah, very, very great points. And well, again, I'm always nitpicking on some things. And here again, even with 3D printers, there still exists scarcity. in the printed good that is being created, right? We have some input, maybe like for current 3D printer, it's plastic filler material, right? And you can only use one plastic filler material for one task at one time. You can either print a little space drone, right? Or you can print yourself a physical Bitcoin, right? You cannot do both at the same time with the same filler material, right? With the same atoms of plastic. So in that sense, there is still scarcity in the plastic itself. However, of course, the idea, the recipe, that the software that goes into printing this and into modeling this, right? The like 3D plans of everything, that is non-scarce information, and thus it can be shared freely because there is no property rights. We do not need to allocate these non-scarce ideas. However, then also further, right, what ties more into this idea of going post money is to have the aspect here that we can create abundant scarce resources, many of them, quantitatively many of them. And the cool thing is that when we have a lot of goods at our disposal, we no longer need to be as careful in the resource allocation, and that will lead us more and more to a post abundance or like a post scarcity world, so to say. But it's similar to air, right? Air is abundance around us. We have a lot of them. And thus, we don't really need to have property rights in it. It's not like this cubic feet of air is mine and you must not take it, right? That's nonsensical because we have a lot to breathe. But then imagine another scenario. You're underwater, you're diving, right, with an air tank, and all of a sudden yours explodes. And there's your peer here, and he has one himself. Well, now all of a sudden, air is no longer abundant. And then you realize that it is scarce, right? That it's either Alice who can then use this air underwater, or it's Bob. They cannot do it at the same time. And then again, we have a problems of resource allocation because we have a potential conflict over who can use this air. And thus, we need property rights again. So here's the really nuances of how we can define the abundance and the scarcity and the difference to both of them.
Is it jumping around too much to ask you about intellectual property rights, Max? I saw a reading on Mises.org recently that I'd like to tackle. That was it was like the argument against patents and against copyrights or something like that. It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. You mentioned non-scarce ideas, right? So ideas and information are not scarce, and they can be freely distributed to everybody without stealing from anybody, right? So if I have my idea and then I share it with Tib, I haven't lost the idea in any way. But our society and our economy is built around these property rights, and it causes all these issues. Intellectual property rights. I don't know if that's jumping around too much here, but
I just watched yesterday a documentary on that. It's the Pirate Bay Away from Keyboard. Really good documentary explaining, how, well, the case for the Pirate Bay and the judgment and all that, and what the founders, or not the founders, but the developers were saying is that copyrights they can be fine if it's to stimulate business creation and value creation in the marketplace. But if it's to prevent innovation by creating barriers to entry to markets for other competitors to get in, then it becomes a problem. Now, the tricky challenge here is, how do you go about drawing the line between the two scenarios? It's almost impossible. And so because of that impossibility of drawing the line between business stimulation and basically censorship through IP protection rights, you're better off not tolerating IP protection, basically. So I found that really fascinating, and especially in the context of peer-to-peer technology, where if there is an IP protected good like a film that is being owned and distributed by different peers to someone who's downloading this file, then how do you sort of go about measuring the the liability of that action of distributing material that is IP protected, but that you don't own the rights of. It's actually on the internet. It doesn't seem to be possible as well. So, personally, what I've made a very basic interpretation of that, and I still need to dig in way deeper. That Mrs. article that you've mentioned, Ben, has been on my reading list forever. Has the internet sort of completely killed the IP protection for digital goods? I think so.
Well,
Yeah.
yes and no. Their IP has always been fallacious. It's always against fundamental axioms. It has always been wrong on many regards. And very axiomatically, and I very much recommend this book, Against Intellectual Property, but the great Stefan Kinsella, who has been on the World Crypto Network and who has sent me down on the scarcity rabbit hole and who has taught me a lot about this precise topic. And I think it's so profound to understand because it is literally the fundamental axiom of the universe on which property rights, society, and exchange and all that builds upon. And now that I claim to understand this topic quite thoroughly and actually write my bachelor thesis over this topic because it is so unbelievably compelling, I really encourage you to read this. And I have here a little tweet summary with like quotes from the book, but maybe just to read the conclusion from Kinsella himself. We see then that a system of property right in ideal objects necessarily requires a violation of other individual property rights. For example, to use one's own tangible property as one sees fit. Such a system requires a new homesteading rule which subverts the first occupier rule. Intellectual property, at least in the form of patent and copyright, cannot be justified. It is not surprising that IP attorneys, artists, and inventors often seem to take for granted the legitimacy of intellectual property rights. However, those more concerned with liberty, truth, and rights should not take for granted the institutionalized use of force to enforce IP rights. Instead, we should reassert the primacy of individual rights over our bodies and homesteaded scarce resources. And here this word scarcity is fundamentally important because we only need property rights. The only reason why we need them is because some goods can only be used by one individual at one time. And this potential of a conflict, that is why we need social rules and norms to somehow allocate these resources. And that is either slavery or property rights. And there are no things in between. It's the only two things that we can use. Communism completely goes out of the window and just ignores scarcity. But then if you believe in scarcity, if you understand this, then it's either slavery, the master class can do with the property of the slave class, or it's individual property, that we, each of us, own our own body. There is no thing in between. And currently we will live in slavery because we do not understand scarcity. But I believe that if we do grasp scarcity, then, and by the way, also the beauty that Bitcoin has achieved scarcity is very profound.
Guys, I have to go. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It was a very nice talk. I learned a lot again. So thank you, Max, for organizing this, and I'll definitely join the next one as well. And I'm going to try to get some more reading done for the next one as well.
Well, always lots of reading to do. Nico, thank you very much for joining us. It was a great conversation.
My pleasure.
Yeah, guys. I have the same situation.
Thanks, Nico. Bye-bye.
Yeah, I'm running out of battery from my phone too, so I got to go. But thanks for everyone who was watching and participating in this conversation. And yeah, it was a real pleasure.
Likewise, and I'll follow the group as well. I have a barbecue waiting downstairs. Not that I don't love you guys, but yeah, I'm gonna have to jet as well. It was a pleasure. chatting, learned a lot, and yeah, more readings to do for sure.
Yeah, you guys keep up the good work.
Ciao,
bye.
Ben, Raphael, Max. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, Ben, and if it's only us two, I no longer want to talk to you.
Yeah. Time is scarce, man.
Precisely. Well, that's actually a really interesting point. Is time scarce?
Human individual time is scarce, right?
Yeah, I'll say so. Right.
My time is scarce.
Yeah, the focus and attention, right? You can only do one thing at one time,
Sure.
and but time in and of itself, I don't know. I don't think so, because no one really owns time, right? Like time as a construct. It's much more of a, I don't know.
Well, I'd also argue that even as scientists, we don't necessarily understand time, how long time has been around or how long it will be around, right?
Yeah, especially now that we have block time, which is much more reliable.
It's funny because it's like less precise but more accurate or something.
Yeah.
It's not very precise, but it is. I still don't understand. I haven't fully grokked that whole block time is like better, right? Because it's like, oh, somewhere within an hour, you're sure that this thing has happened, right?
Well, yeah, time is a really iffy concept, and especially how Bitcoin implements it, because right, we have Unix timestamps,
Mhm.
and these Unix timestamps are like the same as your computer uses when it shows you the time, right? It's synced with the internet and like has a battery, so it keeps up to date and everything. But the really crazy thing is that in Bitcoin, the miner himself stamps his own time block, right? And he can lie here. He can put whatever. But there are a couple really interesting rules that are in the Nakamoto consensus, which is that, and maybe why it's important. It's important because we have the rule that on average, we want to have 10 minutes per block, right? And that is really difficult to get, like really, really difficult. And the way that we get it is genius, because again, time is a fickle concept and we don't really have a consensus on what time is. What is this moment here and now, and how can we define it across all individual experiences? It's pretty damn difficult. Just like speed of light, like in and of itself, right? And
time is relative,
exactly.
according to Einstein.
Yeah.
And actually, the nodes they use some relativity. They look at the like average network average time or something, where they look at the time of other nodes around the peers around them, right?
Yes, exactly, right? So you ask everyone around you, hey, what time is it? And you're like, yeah, okay. Like, I trust you somewhat, but I'll take like an average of everyone. I mean, it's crazy. But then also how it is in the blocks, right? Because it might be that block 100 has a timestamp of today, but then block 101 has a timestamp of 1 hour ago. That could actually happen. But we have like proof of work that work has been done in between of those, right? And we can still prove with like the hash target that is met that actually time has passed and work has been done.
Because the first thing had to be done, and then the new work has to have included the information from the previous work, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. But we can still have like wrong times within. It's crazy. But I really like then that there is again the power of full nodes, right? Full nodes enforce a consensus rule that a block has to be within a 2-hour time window of the last 2 blocks, right? So you take the average of the last 2 hours of blocks, and 12 blocks, not 2. So 2 hours of blocks, the last 12 blocks, and then the new block has to be within this range.
Yes.
I think.
I think that's true too. Yes, I just remember reading that, and I think if nobody has any idea what the hell we're talking about right now, the most important thing that I understood about block time is that it's sequential time, right? So the actual number of what time it was isn't as important, but like because of what we were just saying, you can't make a new block without including all of the information from the previous block, which references all the information from all the previous blocks. So you can't make a new block that starts before the other block. It's just impossible. It's thermodynamically impossible to do unless you're like super, super lucky. Which I guess theoretically then you could, but no.
And again, this just shows the importance of moving away from blockchain, because it's so boring. A chain of blocks?
Time chain.
Time chain all the way.
Dude,
I mean, seriously.
Reading that thread was so awesome because I was like awake at like 1 a.m. and I saw like this come up in my feed, and it was Francis Poulot, and he's like, "It's time chain now, bitches." And like I felt like I was in the same mindset as I'd had a few glasses of wine, and Francis Poulot is probably like like 1 or 2 drinks deep somewhere in Canada, reading this at like 2 a.m. And he's like, "Oh my God, it's the time chain." It was amazing.
Yep. And it was crazy because like nowhere in the white paper is it. Like, not even once blockchain. It's always a timestamping server. And then later in his emails, it's a time chain. So clearly, Francis has done some reading of the holy book of Satoshi, the gospel, his truest vision.
No, you know where it came from, right?
Time chain.
You know where it came from, right? The original code. He found the original code. The code itself, he found it in the comments of the original code that he sent out on the mailing list. That's where he found it. I don't think it was in the emails so much as from the code itself. He was reading the original copies of the code, and it was like commented in and the time chain. And he was like, ah.
Right. And again, the beauty of open source software, right? These information never die.
Mm-hmm. Are we still live?
Is someone still watching?
I hope not.
But yeah, we are still live, still kicking, still going.
Hi
strong.
guys.
Oh yeah, but yeah, crazy things to talk about. But so maybe can we swing it back to the book? What do you think so far?
Dude, I'll be honest with you. I had to drop out of these few readings because I have to work on this day, and this is when I do all my reading. But so I'm actually not caught up at all. But I got out of work, and I was going to chat with Tib, and I saw you guys were still on, so I just kind of jumped in. So I didn't want to miss it. So I'm cheating. But that's,
how dare you?
Right, that's the thing is, guys, like this book club is awesome because you don't get bad grades if you didn't do the reading. You just got to show up, just be, just participate. It's awesome.
Yeah, right. And again, it's like, yes, books are nice ways to accumulate information. But of course, there are other ways of doing that, and important is just to do it, right? To be interested in these topics and to take the care to sit down and accumulate this knowledge. But then it's really good to try to understand that, and the conversation is really powerful in doing that, because not just is it helping, so others are helping you to understand this. It's also that you speak it out, right, and you act out what you then have come to understand, and that gives you new input, not just from others, but also again from yourself, because you hear yourself speaking, and that will further your understanding of the subject. So just having these conversations, regardless if you've actually read the book or not, it's very powerful.
Yeah, and for me, learning is a conversation itself, right? So like, you can sit in front of a lecturer, you might be able to pick up some things, but there's no way you can get exactly what the lecturer has in their head, or reading a book, you can't get exactly what the person in the book is saying. You have to have a conversation about it and ask a question. And that is that process of discovery is how we really learn, I think. I still plan on reading the book. I'm just behind right now.
Yeah, it's a really good book. It's actually not too long. And again, the audiobook is available on the Mises Institute, very well read by, I think, Josh Riggenbach. And again, just the power of the Mises Institute is insane. And to have all this knowledge at our fingertips for free, for gratis, it's very powerful. So again, thank you very much for them putting this together.
Absolutely. Mises.org. Mises Institute.
Yep. By the way, are you coming to the Mises University this year?
I can't. I have a wedding.
Shame.
I know.
Me neither though.
Oh.
We'll make our own Mises University with blackjack and hookers.
You're a busy beaver though, Max. I think you're excused. You're doing all sorts of stuff this year.
Yeah, but Mises U is a good place to be in.
And I heard you united some people with some belts, some ninja belts this week, didn't you?
Yes.
Was that you? I heard Marty talking about it, and I saw it on Twitter.
Yeah.
You achieved a status where you were able to bestow belts upon them.
Well, you know, the beautiful thing about the Wasabi Dojo system is that it's very meritocratic. Oh, that's a damn hard word. And so basically, it's white belt, blue belt, yellow belt, green belt, brown belt, black belt, and y'all are no belters, right? So then you need to be promoted to be a white belt, but you can only be promoted by someone who is 2 belts higher than you. So a white belt cannot promote a no belt. You actually have to be a blue belt in order to be able to promote a white belt. And then if you are a yellow belt, you can actually promote a blue belt, right? So a white belt make a blue belt. And so Nopara belted me a couple months ago when we started this, and then he belted me again to being now the blue belt in again a couple weeks ago, and then actually have it right here, the yellow belt that I got at the Understanding Bitcoin conference in Malta. That is now mine, and that I'm immense proud actually to have. So I could now promote up to blue belts, and of course, Jeremy says these belts are racist. Absolutely. But the cool thing is, right? So I was like, yeah, like Marty Bent, great podcast, right? And Matt Odell has been talking about Wasabi for a while now, many months, and great stuff, like great education, not just fluff pieces, but actually best practices. And so, yeah, they've done good work. They deserve our recognition, and because I'm now at the Cantillon effect of giving out belts, I can do that.
And for those who aren't following along, Wasabi Wallet is helping privacy, and it is open source software. And what these 3 people are doing, Matt, and actually 4, if you're including Nopara, all these people are trying to spread privacy and sovereignty to the world. And I think I think you guys all deserve any recognition that comes to you. So commend you, sir. Personally commend you for this work that you do, this great work, right?
Yeah, dude, thank you very much. But you know, the thing is, the belts are not on the blockchain, so say they don't exist, and that kind of sucks. They're not on the time chain. Come on.
You can put it in a tweet stamp.
Oh, that is fair. Let me do that.
I use that thing way too much. Tweet stamp.
Especially for Bitcoin obituaries, like all the IMF, all the ECB stuff, like the
tweet
Fed
stamp.
post. Yeah, it's like it's only an obituary when the tiers of no coiners are fused within the time chain forever and ever. And then it's a real obituary.
All right, Max, should we call it? I think you guys are 3.5 hours in now.
Is someone still watching? I'm really curious.
Are there any viewers?
I don't think so.
They deserve a belt just for that.
Oh god. Yep, pretty much. We can actually see that. Oh, YouTube is so confusing. Please Google make your software better. 3.5 hours on time chain, and now Jeremy says that. 19 people are still watching. Yay. That's something.
We're sorry.
Crazy people. We're very sorry for wasting your scarce time.
And you're welcome.
Oh, no, it's actually 2 hours only. Okay, that's peanuts.
Oh. We've made it longer than that.
Yeah, that's nothing. Oh no. Okay. So, but maybe let's finish this with like one more round of shilling. Of course, please read the new Libertarian. Sorry, For a New Liberty, the Libertarian Manifesto by Murray Newton Rothbard. A great, great book. And you can get it, of course, for free here on the Mises Institute. And join us here in the conversation on the Bitcoin reading group. Over here it is. Really great. Jump into the Slack, hang out in the conversation there. And of course, every Saturday, also here live on the World Crypto Network. And don't even have the WCN site on. Oh God, crazy. Too many tabs. But yeah, also check my personal site Towards Liberty, and especially the events. We talked about that a bit previously. You meet us all inside in Meet Space and verify that we're actually not just dogs on cyberspace, but actually real human beings. We can do like timestamps and everything. That's going to be nice. So we were joined by Nico from Consensus Network, Tip, and Crypto Rafe, and then of course also Mr. Was it Mr. Cool BP, Ben Prentice, with the $10 billion Bitcoin note over here. So yeah. Also, one thing that I still wanted to show, we covered it briefly, just because it's such a phenomenal lecture by the unspeakable brilliant mind of your Guido Holzmann. The cultural consequences of fiat money, a mind-blowing talk. Only 56 minutes, but I've watched it probably like 7-8 times already. It's so profound, and he's a wordsmith and very, very bright mind. So check this out, very in line with what we talked about previously. So Ben, what's up? Anything else to share?
No, I was going to agree with you on all of those. But guys, got to check out all of those links, including the Slack. We got some amazing Bitcoiners in there. People you recognize, people you don't. George Guido Husband, unbelievable guy. Ethics of Money Production is ridiculous. Super excited to read For a New Liberty. All of that stuff. Max's website is so good. I'm starting to work my way through that. Super happy to be here, guys. Keep learning. Don't trust our information. Verify it. Do your own research. We love you.
Yes. Great ending. Great ending. Okay. Love and peace, my friends. Thank you very much for joining us today, and see you on the next show. Bye-bye.